If you haven't played Tunic, please go play it now. There are so many spoilers in this video that it will completely change your experience of the game if you don't play it first. This game is an easy 10 out of 10, easily my game of the year for 2022, even above the likes of Elden Ring, and I'm sure you'd sing its praises too if it's the style of game you like. Don't let the aesthetic fool you, this is not a Zelda clone any more than Dark Souls is. Sure, it's an exploration game with sword combat, a shield, and items galore, but it's definitely more of a Souls-like Metroidvania than anything else. There are plenty of puzzles to sink your teeth into, and secrets that I can't even begin to describe without spoiling everything. So please, give this game a shot before watching this video. I'll be waiting here as long as you need, but you can only play the game for the first time once. Don't even watch a review. IGN's has something I'd call a major spoiler less than a minute in. It's really worth going in as blind as possible. Now that that's out of the way, can you beat Tunic without rolling? My first thought was obviously not. The second boss has too much health to tank through and most of its attacks are too quick to get out of the way of, but I was pleasantly surprised. That's jumping a bit ahead though, so let's bring it back. We start off like normal, open up to the Ruin Seeker, who I'll be calling Rue from now on because I like the name, dead on the shore. Necromancy occurs, we grab the strongest weapon in the game, conjure a bomb out of midair, and then grab the item that makes the stick completely overpowered. Using the stick and fire sword card, we can cut grass, meaning we can explore quite a bit more without even grabbing the sword. Turns out the sword is pretty useful anyway though, and I want to kill all the bosses, so going through the forest is necessary. I mean, I'm nerfing myself by using the sword, it makes the game way harder. I just didn't want this challenge run to be a cakewalk. It's not like the second boss is entirely immune to the stick or anything, that'd be ridiculous. Anyway, time for the first boss. Boss isn't really the right term, it's a mini-boss at best, but it still has a boss health bar, so I'm counting it as a boss. You can entirely avoid this fight by either getting the sword from the garden, not using the checkpoint in the forest, or even just by sneaking around it, but fighting is fun. We don't even have the shield yet, so fighting is a little harder than normal, but it's easy enough to tank through the fight, especially when you forget that you have invincibility mode turned on from a different play session. It's not like it mattered all that much, it's still an easy fight, I just wanted to be transparent with you guys. Also, when you're ringing the bell, make sure you don't have Fire Sword on, it makes it so you can't hit the bell. I learned this the hard way in my stick-only playthrough. This was the point that I realized that traversal was going to be real slow, but I was ready. Rue's just taking a casual stroll through the land of Tunic. Panicking helps a lot when you're hoping to push down a bridge before the enemies catch up, by the way. The wand is indispensable in this playthrough, especially later on, but you can get quite a bit of use out of it now if you just don't want to deal with normal enemies. I went around and collected quite a few collectibles, but I didn't use many of them. A couple bombs to get chests in the overworld, a pepper in the siege engine fight, and a bunch of mana berries during the final boss, but you don't really need to collect them since Bonks sells them. Bonks for Bone Fox, the merchant guy. I recommend getting at least 2 extra trinket slots. I only ended up getting 1 because I forgot to collect coins after getting the first one and didn't remember until the point of no return. Upgrades are also pretty useful, especially attack upgrades. I did end up accidentally rolling during traversal a couple times, but I'm not going to restart for that. I can't unbind roll without also unbinding interact like I could with this door. I may have been technically defeated by multiple chests and ladders, but it's my challenge run, so stuff it. The house key is easily the most important key in the whole game. It allows access to the shield, which is basically required for this run. It's probably not technically required, but it makes certain sections so much easier, especially areas with turrets. Parrying them is the easiest, most efficient, and fastest way to get rid of them. Otherwise you'll be wasting a bunch of mana, or you'll probably take damage trying to attack them. Getting into the well can be a pain, but it's not a huge issue. Just make sure you're taking everything out along the way, especially the turret, so you have time to push down the bridge. Same goes for most of the well itself. Take enemies out as you go, otherwise you'll be swarmed by a ton of slorms, and they will kill you very quickly. The dungeon as a whole isn't really an issue, just take your time. The hardest part is probably the room just after the dark corridor, as there are multiple shielded rudlings. Just pick them off one by one, being careful with your attack opportunities, and you'll be through in no time. The mini-boss at the end of this may have been an issue if I didn't use 2 bombs right off the bat, but all things considered, I doubt it. The Dark Tomb is even less of an issue. Once again, just take your time so you don't get overwhelmed, and make sure to grab the orange peril ring in the first room. It's extremely useful, if not borderline required for this playthrough. The West Garden is very pretty, probably my favorite looking area in the game. The cherry blossom petals falling in the calm breeze, the music conducive to the chillest of atmospheres, and the ruins crumbling around you in the still water. That said, it's definitely the hardest part of the run so far, mostly due to the chopping gnoms. They're super tanky for our current damage output, and it's very difficult to not take damage without rolling, despite their near inability to turn. In fact, the trio of them is where I took my first death. Normally I'd just sprint through here, kill the fairies after climbing a ladder later, and then open the shortcut. That's not really an option without rolling, since you can't sprint without rolling first. Make sure to grab the magic dagger while you're here as well. It's required for a fight later on, as well as being extremely useful already. I'm not sure if the Garden Knight would be possible without a shield. That applies to most of the other bosses as well, but this one gets a shout out for being the first real roadblock without it in this run. I was expecting this fight to take some time, given that it's impossible to avoid the second 2 slams of the 3 slam attack, and the spin would probably be difficult to dodge too, but the fight was over before much trouble could occur. You can just block the second 2 slams after strafing the first and let your stamina restore afterward. Surprisingly easy fight given the circumstances of this run. With both bells ringing, it's time to make our way into the forest fortress. The main gate is closed and surrounded by a moat, so we have to take the path through the caves under the fortress to get in. The first area isn't much of an issue. The spiders are fast and can be annoying, not to mention terrifying, but they're pretty easy to just walk past, especially compared to the slorms. I would still recommend killing them along the way, but that takes much longer. Bombs can also be very useful for them, assuming you picked up enough extra to use them here. If not, you can also buy some from the shop next to the entrance of the caves. You can't block the attacks from the custodians because they're fire attacks, and you'd normally put out the fire by rolling, so they can be pretty dangerous. Luckily, you can put out the fire by attacking a few times, but this takes a lot longer than rolling and is especially difficult if you're also trying to not die. The wand is your friend, and the dagger can put their candles out, which is especially useful for the big guys. The magic custodians can be a bit of a pain, but you can dodge their AoEs if you just keep walking. Remember that you need to take out the magician above the fuses next to the main door before activating them. I always forget that somehow. The siege engine can be annoying. There are certain instances where you simply can't avoid its attacks. If you're too far away and there's no rubble next to you during the laser or one of those bullet spam attacks, you will get hit. Sometimes you can strafe the bullets, but it's not guaranteed, so it's best to avoid that. You can parry the bullet spam for a huge chunk of damage. That's probably the best source of damage you'll get. You can also do quite a bit of damage if you're right up against the siege engine after a laser. Getting under it while it's spawning the bombs is another good chance to get damage. Other than that, you're mostly going to want to stand back. You can't avoid the slam or the quick swipe when you're close to it, and it uses those attacks a lot. The giant swipe usually isn't an issue because it just doesn't go very far, and you can usually get out of the way quick enough. I spent 20 minutes trying to use skill and strategy to win, then I accidentally got knocked into RTSR range and stun-locked it to death, so that was fun. Alright, next up is the atoll. I would highly recommend grabbing the tincture here. I forgot and it made a fight later on much harder than it needed to be. The bracer is also pretty useful. It decreases the amount of stamina blocking takes. Neither are strictly required by any means, but they make this run much easier. You can use a frog to get up to the northwestern fuse and simply walk to the northeastern fuse. Just don't underestimate the little crabs. They can surround and conquer you very quickly. Pretty much all of the frog's domain is easy. Just walk through, killing most of the enemies along the way, and you won't meet much opposition. The hardest part is grabbing the orb, but you don't need to escape alive, so it's not that bad. It's much easier to get the southern fuses with the orb, only takes a little exploring, and then it's on to the Librarian. The Librarian was also surprisingly easy. This fight took me almost 4 hours in my stick-only playthrough, so I was expecting some opposition, but I took him down on the third try. Its orbs can be weaved through rather easily, the laser doesn't move at all as long as you're close to it when it starts, and most other attacks can either be blocked or walked around very easily. The only unavoidable damage is the sideways purple slash, but it doesn't do much damage. The enemies he spawns can be annoying, but they're also very important for actually doing damage to him. You can attack him during his lightning slam as well, just remember that he always faces the direction he was before he teleported. And you can attack him at sword length while the AoE is out, just be careful to not get too close. On to the quarry. Quarry? Quarry. Normally the upper section of the quarry is extremely threatening, but there's also a shortcut straight to the bottom. There's an attack upgrade just past the bridge you knocked down that I didn't grab, but it only affects a single boss from here, so it doesn't really matter all that much. The lower section of the quarry is still difficult, but it's much shorter. I went to grab the mask by ice and one grappling an enemy, but it's not super necessary, it just makes a short section a little easier. The shotgun is nice for a few sections, but I didn't end up grabbing it until just before the end of the game. Don't worry much about missing it. Don't forget to kill the snipers next to the broken ladder before climbing down. They've caused me issues before. Then it's just a straight shot to the shortcut. The shortcut was actually added post-release, and it's much appreciated, just for the peace of mind. There aren't any enemies between here and the next checkpoint, but it makes it easier to ignore the enemies before this point. Underneath the ziggurat can be very intimidating at first, but there's nothing down here that bad on its own. Large groups of fairies end up either killing themselves or can be taken down with the wand with very little effort. Turrets can either be parried one at a time or again shot with the wand, and the mini-boss here is nothing too bad. It's entirely viable to tank the entire first phase, and the second one is one of the most telegraphed enemies in the entire game, so it shouldn't be much of an issue at all. Once past the mini-boss, the purple spider thing can be a pain, but the turrets always target them instead of you, so you can lure them to the turrets and have them taken care of for you. Just make sure you're in a spot where the turrets can't get you after they're done with the spider fox things. You don't actually need to fight the two fuse enemies, I wouldn't even recommend it since you can't avoid the disco floor attack anyway. Just walk straight up to the fuse, start praying, and hope they use a favorable attack. You'll generally be just fine. Climb down the ladder while the fuses kill the fox spiders, and you're home free to the boss protecting the final questagon. I spent an hour fighting the boss Scavenger because I'm stubborn, but I also spent 4 hours fighting her in a different challenge, so this is child's play. I refuse to use anything other than the fire sword, which makes you stuck at 1 HP, and the orange peril ring, so I had to do this entire fight without getting hit once. It doesn't seem like it would be possible since I said you can't avoid the disco floor attack, right? Well, you can if you get lucky. If she uses it either the edge where the entrance is, or behind the questagon, you can avoid it by going to the other side of the arena. This isn't viable since it's so reliant on luck. You can also freeze her just before she uses the attack. Every other attack can be easily blocked or strafed, just make sure to use the dagger and wand to freeze her before she jumps. If you're too late, she can hit the floor after being frozen and still send out the shockwave, but it's entirely possible to prevent her from jumping every single time. Other than that, the biggest threat was the kick, since she can kick you with your shield up, drain your stamina completely, then shoot you or jump before you can block again, so just be careful. With the increased damage from RTSR, if you don't know, the orange peril ring behaves exactly the same as the red tearstone ring from Dark Souls, so that's why I've said RTSR, and fire sword, as well as the fire tick damage, it's only a matter of time before before the boss Scavenger goes down. Now we have a bit of a dilemma. I want to fight all the bosses, including the gauntlet at the end of the cathedral, but that would require using the dash ability from the laurels to get back to the Heir. There are 3 possibilities here. Either the dash doesn't count as a roll at all, we kill the Heir now and don't do all the bosses, or we only use the dash when it's absolutely required. I'm going to go for a middle ground where I only use the dash where it's required, and I'm not going to get any of the relics, so the fight will be done the same as the first encounter. So we die to the Heir, and we're back at the start of the game with Rue dead on the ground. This time maybe actually they're a ghost, right? I don't know the lore well enough for this. Half necromancy occurs at seance. Anyway, getting through the graveyard doesn't require any rolls, of course. Just be careful taking out the malicious spirits and floating skeletons as you go. They're too fast to outpace, so you need to take them out, especially since you need to activate the fuse. The cathedral itself doesn't have many new challenges. The only things that pose any threat are the stronger foxes, and they can be taken out easily with a shotgun, though I'd recommend using the reverse ash trinket, the one that makes your HP flasks mana flasks. The birds can also be really annoying, but again the shotgun reigns supreme. On to the penultimate fight, the enemy gauntlet. A lot of people seem to have trouble on their first go through this section, but it's really easy if you just think of it as a puzzle. That goes for all of the fights to a degree, but this one doesn't require any reactions or skill for the most part. I recommend starting with the knights. Kill the first one with 2 quick shotgun shots, then stunlock the second against the wall with your sword. Use reverse ash to refill your mana, then unequip it and get your flasks back from the altar. The fairies can all be taken out with a single wand shot each, and they drop more mana than you use for each shot, so you can be used to refill your mana. Just make sure to not get cocky with them. There are a ton of skeletons, but you can easily group them all up and take them out with a shotgun. I recommend taking out the fairies before the skeletons so you have enough mana going into the fairies. The rudlings and frogs all spawn slow enough so that you can kill them before they get a chance to do anything, and the custodians die from you approaching them, so this really isn't that much of a threat. Finally, the Heir, Mother herself. That's my second reference. Freud, you win this time, but I won't lose so easily again. This fight is simultaneously the easiest fight in the game and actually impossible. Let me explain. Most of their attacks can be blocked or parried, some can't though, such as the dash, thrusting spin, and the multiple shockwave attacks. With how often they use these attacks, and how much health they have, it's essentially impossible to beat the Heir, with a caveat. You can make it so the Heir can't even attack you. You can freeze them with a wand and dagger, do 2 attacks, freeze again, rinse and repeat. There is still a pretty major issue with this strategy though. We don't have enough mana. Luckily, there are 2 things we can do to remedy this. In the previous patch of the game, this combo took significantly less mana and speedrunners used it to melt the fight. Andrew cares about the community and it added a workaround for speedrunners. There's a spell you can use to restore the cost of the spell to what it was in the previous patch. You can use this once at the beginning of the fight and it should last through the whole fight. I won't be telling you how to use or get this spell, in case anyone ignored the spoiler warning, but you can join the speedrun Discord or the official Finji Discord and ask. If you join the Finji Discord, make sure you're not asking in the general chat please, use the Deeper Secrets channel. You also have just enough time to equip a mana berry, use it, and re-equip the wand in the time that it takes for the Heir to unfreeze, and this works in both phases. You'll have to restore your mana 2 or 3 times, so here's what you do. Make sure you have RTSR equipped. I also used reverse ash because I found drinking the flasks was easier than using a berry, and that way I only had to use 1 berry. As soon as you start the fight, use the spell, then get hit. You should be left with 1 HP. Now start freezing. Freeze, hit twice, freeze, until you're almost out of mana. Then when you use your last shot, instead of attacking, use a berry, then wait for the Heir to start shaking as if it's about to break out, then freeze again. Otherwise it won't reset the freeze timer. Repeat until the boss is dead. And that's it. All of the bosses in Tunic can be beaten without rolling, with a caveat. This was a really fun challenge, though it was a little easier than I expected, honestly. The hardest part was using a mana berry quick enough in the Heir fight. The boss Scavenger took me a while, but she wasn't that bad, and she was really fun. I'd recommend doing this if you're looking for another way to play the game. It's definitely a good time if you like challenge runs. I still need to actually beat the Heir in my stick-only playthrough. I never ended up doing that, though I do want to make that like a live stream thing after I end up finishing my Tunic review, because I have, I think, 30 minutes of that recorded. It's still going to take a while to get that done, but I think that would be a really fun thing. Like, after I finish the review, I go and live stream me beating the Heir. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I love you all, and I don't know how to end this.